We have all dreamed of hitting the jackpot at least once in our lives, haven't we? Of waking up one morning suddenly rich. We tell ourselves, if I just had a lot of money, all my problems would end. I would live like a king and never work another day. This is humanity's oldest and most innocent fantasy. But history whispers a very dark secret in our ear. Sudden unearned wealth is not a reward. It is actually a lethal virus. The story of the Spanish Empire is exactly that. In the 16th century, the Spanish didn't just win the lottery. They practically ripped the bank's vault out of the wall and took it home. They discovered a hoard of silver larger than anything seen before in history. They became the first empire on which the sun never set. They had an invincible army and an unshakable belief that God was on their side. But then, they watched their magnificent empire crumble, crushed under the weight of its own gold. They learned the hardest lesson in economics the hard way. Unlimited gold and money are not actually wealth. They are just a dangerous drug. And Spain, as you are about to see, was about to overdose. To understand this tragedy, we need to rewind the film a bit to the year 1545, to the freezing Andes Mountains of modern-day Bolivia, to Potosi. Before this moment, Spain was powerful, but not economically invincible. The course of history changed entirely by accident. A local indigenous man named Diego Gualpa was chasing his runaway llama up a steep slope. He stumbled, and to stop himself from falling into the abyss, he grabbed a bush. When the bush was uprooted, Diego saw it shimmering in the earth beneath. Pure veins of silver. Diego hadn't just found a mine, he had found the Cerro Rico, the rich hill made of solid silver. When the Spanish conquerors saw this, they couldn't believe their eyes. The legendary El Dorado they had been searching for in the jungles for years was right there under their feet. Almost overnight, that desolate hill turned into one of the largest cities in the world. But this economic miracle began with a human nightmare. To extract the silver, the Spanish introduced the mita system, a brutal regime of forced labor. Tens of thousands of indigenous people were forced into those dark, suffocating tunnels. The conditions were so horrific that the locals named Potosi the mountain that eats men. Digging wasn't enough. They had to refine it too. For this, they mixed crushed rock with toxic mercury and had people trample it with their bare feet. This chemical revolution caused production to explode. Between 1550 and 1800, 80% of the world's silver came from this single terrifying place. Spain melted this silver down and minted history's most famous coin, the piece of 8. This was the dollar of the Renaissance. From a tea merchant in Shanghai to a spice trader in Istanbul, from Boston to Seville, everyone accepted this money. Twice a year, when massive Spanish treasure fleets weighed down by silver appeared on the horizon, church bells would ring across Spain. King Philip II would breathe a sigh of relief, and the bankers would rub their hands together. The party could continue for another year. Spain instantly became the superpower of Europe. King Philip II saw himself not just as a ruler, but as the sword of God. But the Spanish made a fatal miscalculation. They looked at their piles of silver and said, "We are rich." In reality, they were planting the seeds of their own destruction. You see, they confused money with wealth. Money is just a medium of exchange. Real wealth is production. It is the wheat in the field, the cloth on the loom, the ship in the shipyard. Spain had found infinite money, but they were about to stop producing. Silver was like a narcotic. It gave a massive feeling of invincibility, but deep down it was rotting the vital organs of the economy. Farmers left the fields, blacksmiths dropped their hammers. Why work? Ships full of silver were arriving anyway. To understand how this destroyed them, imagine you are a shoemaker in Seville in 1550. The fleet has just arrived. The pockets of sailors, soldiers, and nobles are full of silver. Everyone wants shoes from you. What do? You raise your prices. Now imagine the baker, the landlord, and the tailor all doing the same thing at the same time. This is how the first major inflationary crisis of modern history, the price revolution, began. Prices skyrocketed by 400%. The poor were crushed. A peasant found that even though there was more silver in the country than ever before in history, he could buy less bread than his grandfather did. Famine returned, not because there was no food, but because the money was broken. For the rich and the state, the problem was different, and this killed Spanish industry. Because of inflation, everything in Spain cost a fortune. While our Spanish shoemaker had to sell his shoes for 10 silver coins due to costs, a shoemaker in France or England, where gold had not yet flooded in, could make the same item for 2 silver coins. What did the Spanish consumer do? They went and bought the cheaper French goods. Thus Spain turned into a giant funnel. Silver entered Seville, was unloaded, and within weeks flowed out the back door to England, the Netherlands, and France as import payments. Think of the irony. The Spanish were enslaving people in mines, fighting pirates on the oceans, but at the end of the day they were giving that money to their enemies just to fill their stomachs. A French observer of the time laughed and summarized the situation. Spain chews the food, but the rest of Europe swallows it. This easy money poisoned the culture as well. While the merchant class was rising and building factories in England and the Netherlands, working for a living began to be seen as shameful in Spain. The ideal Spaniard was the Hidalgo, minor nobles who did not work, lived only on a state salary, and polished their armor to show off even if they were starving to death. Novels like Don Quixote are full of these delusional characters who deemed working beneath them. While the Dutch invented the stock market, Spain just spent. And King Philip II had a very hearty appetite. He wanted to rule the world. He was fighting the Ottomans in the east, the Protestants in the north, and the English at sea, all at the same time. But war is expensive, and since Spain produced nothing, they had to buy everything. They were even buying gunpowder and cannons from the Dutch, whom they were fighting. They were financing their own enemies with their own silver. Then came the big gamble, the Spanish Armada. In 1588, Philip built the most expensive fleet in history to invade England, but he didn't have enough cash on hand. So, he sold the future. He went to German and Genoese bankers and took out massive loans called asientos. He practically went to loan sharks and said, "Give me millions now, I'll pay when the treasure fleet arrives." The interest rates were 20, 30, sometimes 40%. We all know the result. The Armada was a disaster. Storms and mismanagement destroyed the fleet. The investment sank to the bottom of the ocean, but the debts remained. The bankers didn't care about the weather. They wanted their money. By the 1570s, the empire's entire tax revenue was only enough to pay the interest on the debts. Every gram of silver arriving from America went into the bankers' pockets before it even touched Spanish soil, and the inevitable end, bankruptcy. The most powerful man in the world, Philip II, stood up and officially said, "I am not paying." This was the first sovereign default in history. Banks in Europe collapsed, but Spain didn't cut spending. They borrowed at higher interest rates and spent again. They went bankrupt 5 times in a row. This was a cycle of destruction: borrow, spend, crash. The people suffered the most. When there was no silver left for the internal market, the king minted worthless copper coins called vellon. While the rich used silver, the poor were forced to live with this copper scrap. The middle class was wiped out. By the mid-1600s, the party was over. The Potosi mines began to dry up. But because Spain had spent a century learning how to spend rather than how to produce, they had nothing left. No industry, no banks, no trade network. The master of the world had turned into the bankrupt giant of Europe. Meanwhile, England and the Netherlands, which had drawn Spain's silver by selling goods, used that capital to build shipyards, fund science, and start the Industrial Revolution. They had solved the ultimate truth. Real wealth is not the metal that comes out of the ground, but the productivity of your people. Spain remained nothing more than a hollow pipe through which the wealth of America flowed to build the modern economies of Europe. The story of the Spanish Empire is a giant warning sign. Whether it's silver in 1550, gold in 1800, or oil today, easy money breaks that sacred bond between work and reward. It wears a mask of false prosperity, but it rots the foundation. The Spanish Empire drowned under gold. They thought they were the masters of their destiny, but in reality they became slaves to their own fortune. Thank you for watching. If you want to hear more interesting history stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. See you in the next video. Have a nice day. Goodbye.